Well, good evening, everyone. We were at 7 o'clock. We've got people joining us online, so we're going to go ahead and start. We may have a few more people joining us. I know a couple people that are still yet to come. Good evening. My name is Mark Broman. I'm the Executive Director of the Wachiska Audubon. And Wachiska is an independent chapter of the National Audubon Society with a geographical area covering 17 counties in southeast Nebraska. You can follow us on our website or Facebook. We've got some of the Vote for Climate in Mind signs out there. So we got a big election coming up, so if you got a $10 bill burning a hole in your pocket, we've got the signs out there for you. So they're $10 a piece for the Vote with Climate in Mind. We've got, I think, 5 or 6 here tonight. We've got a few more back at the office. So if you don't have one yet, you can pick one up or stop by the office anytime. I want to thank everybody that filled out a recent survey that we sent out on the strategic planning survey. And we'll be sharing those results soon as we progress and work on developing our next 5-year strategic plan. For the upcoming Wachiska elections, we've got the president, vice president, and 4 at-large positions open. So if you'd like to throw your hat in the ring or know someone you'd like to nominate, please contact one of the nomination committee members, and they are the current president, Teresa Pella, Carol Hinkle, or Lisa Sutton, or myself. You can contact me also with the name. Nominations are open until September 30th. The elections will be held at our meeting in November, and the new officers and members will take their office starting January 1. The next regular board meeting will be via Zoom on Tuesday, August 20th at 7 p.m. These meetings are open to the public. If you'd like to join us online, just let me know and I'll send you the Zoom link. I about forgot to mention the fall birdseed sales coming up, and the reason I mentioned it was because today we were discussing when the delivery would be. We're looking at probably around the 12th of October for the delivery date, so those seed orders will be coming out probably in next month's in the September Wachiska Babbling Brook. So be ready to order your fall birdseed. That'll be coming up. Tim Knott and I attended the Bluebirds Across Nebraska meeting held last weekend down in Unadilla, and they're looking to locate 2 or 3 more chimney swift towers. They're building these chimney swift towers around. They've got a couple up at Ponca and one over at Schramm, and they put one on East Campus just north of Hardin Hall. So at 33rd and Holdridge Street over there, just outside of Hardin Hall, they've got a chimney swift. So people might say, well, what are the Bluebird people doing with chimney swifts? But they're not just concentrating on bluebirds. They're trying to help out chimney swifts because of the decline in some of these chimneys around town. A lot of these industrial chimneys have been removed, and a lot of new houses they're capped, and the birds can't use the chimneys. So anyway, so if you're interested in chimney swifts, get a hold of the Bluebirds folks. They're trying to find a couple more locations in town and across the state to put these towers up. And now we'll take a couple minutes and see if we have any unusual bird sightings. We'll see if anybody has. Bertha, what do you got?
I want to know if the chimney swifts have moved into the town.
Into the new tower, they haven't yet, but they just put it in this spring out there, and they said it usually takes a year or 2 for them to start using. And it's kind of unusual. I didn't know this until I started talking to them and got involved with these towers. There's usually only 1 pair will nest in a chimney, but there's a lot of them will stay there when they migrate. So like over at Irving Junior High School, there may be 1,000 birds come in there and roost for a couple of weeks, but there's only 1 pair that nest in a chimney usually. So those are for migratory swifts, and then also there may be one that'll set up camp and have a nest there. But so far they haven't got one at any of those 3 sites over at Schramm, the 2 at Ponca, or that one. Those others were put up last fall, so again they're pretty new. So they're hoping that those will start being used. And like I said, they want to put 2 or 3 more in Lincoln and get a few more here, plus having some more statewide.
When you say Ponca, you mean Ponca State Park?
Ponca State Park, yep. Ponca State Park, and then over at Schramm.
Do you know if they're still getting them downtown in that bank chimney?
I don't know if they're still getting downtown in that chimney or not. I know there are several places that I've been told. Irving School is the best over on Irving, on Van Dorn, on about, 20th and Van Dorn. I guess that big old chimney. There was an after-school club that met that Mary Bomberger Brown and Mike Forsberg started, and they saved that chimney. The school was going to have it torn down, but it's a great big industrial chimney, brick chimney. So fortunately they saved that, but there's a couple others around town that they use too. They're kind of like the Purple Martins. They put in a big show. If you go there right as it starts to get dark and they're coming out, it's kind of like the Purple Martins coming into roost. There's a couple places in Omaha where you can go and see thousands. Yes?
We need to teach them to share.
Get them to share. So do we have any unusual bird sightings? Does anybody have anything at their bird feeders, any hummingbirds around or anything nesting? What do you got?
I saw a wood duck, and she had
11 ducklings, a wood duck. Good. I was talking to someone at the Bluebirds conference on Sunday, and a guy 2 years ago down at our Deacon Prairie, he's got a kestrel box and 4 bluebird boxes. The kestrel box he had a wood duck in, and it's a good 3/4 of a mile down to the creek, and you have to go through a cornfield. So that hen had to get those little guys and take them all the way down to the river. But they nested in a kestrel box at Deacon. So is that on your property where they nested? Okay. They can have big clutches. Yep. Anything else? Any other sightings or yes?
Go ahead. No, I had a lucky opportunity yesterday morning, as luck would have it, lifer a prairie chicken hen with 10 chicks.
10 chicks.
Yeah.
Oh, Jackie, there you go. There you go. Good. Okay.
I just saw a bluebird in the apple tree next door. I have bluebird houses and I didn't get anybody to nest there this year, but
Okay.
I was excited to see that there
Yeah.
was really one in the neighborhood.
The bluebird people were talking about how the numbers were way down this year. Some people that normally would fledge 2,200 birds throughout their trail only had 780 this year. And they also said that tree swallows and wren numbers were down, even though they'd prefer to get the bluebirds. Yes.
I take care of the bluebird nests at Indian Cave. We have 21 boxes, and right now we're up to about 150 fledges.
150 fledges on 21 boxes down at Indian Cave. Okay, good enough. Yes.
I've just been disappointed because the last 3 weeks or so, we've been traveling around Nebraska, and I just went to a funeral in Iowa yesterday, and you don't see hardly anything, I don't think.
Yeah.
On the roads and stuff, it's disheartening, I think.
I read an article the other day about insects and the number of insects dropping. They said you drive across the country now, you don't have to use the squeegee at the gas station. It used to be every time you stopped for gas, you had to clean your windshields, and I've found that myself to be true. You don't have to clean the windshield, so there's
Not good.
things going on. Bertha?
Well, they're not birds, but they're butterflies, okay? And I have lots and lots of black swallowtail butterfly caterpillars.
Okay,
And
black
on
swallowtail
my-
caterpillars.
On dill, and I have no clue who put the dill there, and that's what they're eating is the dill. But I've
Yep.
had many, and then also a cardinal came and helped himself to one of them.
Oh, no. And we did have regal fritillaries down at Wildcat Hills. We had a lot of the violets down there, and so Ross was telling me we had a nice bunch down there. I think they were at the tail end. Their numbers are tapering off now, but he said that there were several down there when he was there, and someone else told me they were down there, so it's a good spot for the regals. Anything else? Yes?
I'm on West Van Dorn, and I had a mountain bluebird.
Mountain bluebird on West Van Dorn, great. Okay, okay. Everyone will want to flock to your yard now. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and move along a little bit. This is a reminder that tonight's presentation is available on YouTube as well as past presentations. So if you missed one in the past, you can look it up, or if you want to recommend tonight's presentation to somebody, you can tell them to go look it up. But tonight it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Jackie Augustine. Jackie's the Executive Director of Audubon of Kansas. She received her PhD at Kansas State University, studying the mating behaviors of the greater prairie chickens. She was a faculty member at Ohio State University, Lima. Jackie's an avid birder and enjoys native plantings around her house. If you get a chance, be sure and check out her drive tonight, her ride out in the parking lot. It's very impressive. It's a wrap, and it's got all kinds of endangered species and birds and salamanders and all kinds of things out there. So, and also take a note of the plate. The license plate is a Sandhill Crane, Nebraska plate, and someone might say, well, what is she doing with that? Well, the Hutton Ranch is a 5,000-acre ranch that's owned by Audubon, Kansas, and it's up on the Niobrara River. Some of you have probably been there before, and that's why they've got that Nebraska plate, and I'm sure that she wanted to get to that nice Sandhill Crane plate. So anyway, if you get a chance after tonight, take a look at it. It's out in the parking lot. It's an eye catcher, and we were talking about it. Bertha spotted it. She wants one of those, so she spotted it tonight when she was coming in, so be sure and check that out. Tonight, Jackie's going to talk about the home on the range breeding biology of prairie chickens, and she'll take questions after the presentation. So with that, Jackie.
Okay, good. Microphone's on. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And they said, well, what topic do you want to talk about? And I said, well, the one nearest and dearest to my heart are prairie chickens. It's what connected me to the plains and what kept me coming back and brought me here. So, and I like to subtitle this talk, What Makes Males Sexy? So I'm going to start off by talking about what I studied for my PhD, and then I'm going to talk about you know, the conservation of prairie chickens, and then a little bit about what Audubon of Kansas does. So we've got a bunch of birders in the crowd. Hopefully you can answer this question. Is this a male or a female? Male, definitely a male. Everybody knows that males have these long pinnae over the head that they put up. They have combs over their eyes. They have these air sacs in their throat that they inflate during display. And they have a tail that's entirely black. And so like the comb can deflate and they can stand a lot like a female, but that black tail does stand out. Now, female prairie chickens, you can see they do have pinnae, these feathers behind their head. They can put them up when they're mad, but they're about the third of the size of a male. And then, there we go, the tail has bars on it. They don't have a comb above their eye. When you have them in the hand, you can actually push the feathers apart, and some of them have a little bit of color there, but you don't see that in the field. I'm lucky enough to live in a state with 2 prairie chicken species, greater and lesser. Which one of these is the greater? Right. One on the right, yep. So greater prairie chicken is the one on the right, lesser prairie chicken's on the one on the left, and there's a small range where they overlap in western Kansas, and so this picture was taken there. Where in their range of overlap, they do form mixed species leks, so both lesser and greater on the same lek. This is nice, you can tell them apart very easily. The lesser prairie chicken is smaller and lighter in overall coloration, whereas the greater prairie chicken is larger and darker. They also differ in the color of their air sacs and in their vocalizations. It's a lot harder to get 2 females standing right next to each other, and so this is my version of showing greater and lesser females standing right next to each other. I'll tell you why I have taxidermy mounts and robots a little bit later, but you can see the overall difference in size and coloration. And this picture, you can see a little bit too, the barring on the belly is a great way to tell them apart. So greater prairie chickens have bold barring on the belly that extends all the way to the tail, whereas lesser prairie chickens have very fine barring, and they usually have a little bit of white on their belly before it hits the tail.
And its beak.
The beak,
Beak
well,
is different.
well, that's taxidermy mounts and not a professional taxidermist. Like I said, the ranges of greater and lesser prairie chickens overlap in western Kansas, and so this is a busy map, but I just wanted to show you the largest, lightest blue is the greatest extent of the greater prairie chicken, and the darkest blue color is where they sort of are now. I really need to update this slide because the Missouri population in this one is virtually gone, and even if it was there, there wasn't a connection between Missouri and Kansas for a long time. So that needs to be updated, but otherwise it's generally correct. But a lot of these populations, like in Wisconsin, there's about 200 birds. Illinois, there's about 150. There's about 150 on the Missouri-Iowa border. You know, greater prairie chickens aren't doing well, and they're declining throughout much of their range. Lesser prairie chickens are even rarer. There's only about 30,000 of them left in the world, and they, again, are divided into 2 populations. Their habitats are very different. The greater prairie chicken likes the tall, thick, darker tall grass prairie, whereas the lesser prairie chicken likes the more arid prairies, and so you can kind of see the differences in coloration kind of reflects their overall difference. But again, the range overlaps in western Kansas where the mixed grass prairie occurs. I'm pointing at the dot. There we go. And then this is a zoom in of the lesser prairie chicken home range, and there are 4 subpopulations as dictated by genetics. And this short grass one is the one that overlaps with greater prairie chickens. There's also sand sagebrush, mixed grass, and the sand shinnery. And the lesser prairie chicken is the one that's federally listed under the Endangered Species Act. Because these three subpopulations are connected in the northern part of the range, that whole range is considered threatened. Whereas that one, there's a distinct line that the feds can draw in the sand and say this one's completely separate, and so that's why the bottom one is listed as endangered. However, of these three subpopulations up here, the mixed grass and the sand sage are both critically low numbers. During the last survey, the only one that's doing okay is that short grass region in western Kansas. Might need a new battery. Forward, please.
Oh, there it goes.
There it goes. Prairie chickens have what's called a lek mating system. That word lek is, I forget it's Swedish or Norwegian. It's one of those. It means to dance or to play. And so it's where these males gather. They gather in a very small area. And they defend these territories. So these are two males that are lining up on the edge of their territory and drawing the line, literally. They display, these territories do not contain food or nesting sites. It's just the males themselves. These territories are clumped in space, and so these grid stakes are about 20 feet apart, and you can see that there's a bunch of males in this vicinity. And then the females will visit these leks, and they'll choose one male to mate with, and then she'll go off and raise all the young on her own. Another characteristic of lek mating systems is a high skew in male mating success. And so this is, with about 10% of males getting about 75% of the copulations. And this is the data from one of my leks in 1 year. And you can see that, two males got the majority of copulations, whereas over half the males, even though they showed up on the lek every day and, were regular attenders, half the males never attracted a female. So I was sitting there for my PhD watching this all happen, and it was very clear that the females knew what they were looking for. They knew which male was sexiest, and they all seemed to agree on which male was sexy. But I was sitting in my blind thinking, well, what is it? What is this thing that makes the male sexy? So I wanted to study prairie chickens, and so how do you catch a prairie chicken? Well, they usually don't fly directly to their spot in the morning. They usually fly near the lek, make sure it's safe, and then they walk to their spot. And so we would put these walk-in funnel traps, and so that's what the picture on the left is showing, is that walk-in funnel trap. And this is high-tech animation, you want to watch this. So on the picture, the lek is to the left, and the male just flew in, and he's on the right. So he walks along, maybe, there he goes. He walks along, he gets caught in the fence, and then he walks and finds himself in the trap. And so that's a picture of the bird in the trap. Once they're in the trap, we just take a fishing net and get them out of the trap, and then take them away from the lek to process, so that way other birds can return to the lek. Later in my PhD, we use these drop nets, and so males are very faithful to their territories. They come to the same spot every single day. So at the end, I wanted to catch particular males, and so it was easy. You just figure out where they are, and you put a net over their territory, and you wait for them to walk under it. And this is just held up by tension, and you just pull the release, and it drops on top of them. And then we took a whole suite of measurements, and we even used a magic marker and colored their tails so that, when they display, they put their tails up, so it's really obvious. That fades over time. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I had a visitor to the lek once, and I forgot to let them know that I colored the tails, and after they came out, they're like, I don't know why the field guide doesn't show that red tail. That's really distinctive. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, but I colored it. So anyway, we used that to tell individuals apart. We also put a unique combination of colored leg bands on and took a whole suite of measurements. And so we had these birds, we got all the measurements, then we let them go. This is my grad student. Bye. And they would come back sometimes the same day, but often the next day, and come back and like nothing had happened. Of course, you have to find beautiful places to work. This is Konza Prairie near Manhattan, Kansas, if you've never been to there. I do like to point out that that little box on top of the hill is my blind. Prairie chickens usually put their leks on tops of hills, and there's two main ones about why they do this. One is for sound transmission, so that their wonderful vocalizations can transmit through the landscape. On a calm morning, I can hear these birds a mile or a mile and a half away. So, that's because they put it in the place where they can make their sound go the farthest. The other idea is that on tops of hills is also a great place for seeing predators come. So that's where I keep pointing at the screen. Point back there. Okay, and I go and I watch them. You have to watch them, you have to get there in the pitch black of night. So I'm getting up at 3:30, 4 a.m. to get out there. Have to get out to the lek an hour before sunrise. The birds show up about a half an hour before sunrise, and they stay for about 3 hours. And you have to hold your bladder during that whole time. But the view is lovely. This is a view of one of our lesser prairie chicken leks in western Kansas. Okay, now the fun part. Time to start showing you videos. So what did I see when I was sitting in the blind? Well, of course, the most fun thing to see is the display. So the first one is going to be a greater prairie chicken, and so this, look at the whole sequence, of course. Both species start out with rapid foot stomping. They have their tail up, they're pinning up above their head, and then they culminate in inflating their air sac and making a vocalization. So greater prairie chickens have that orange air sac, and then they have a boom, boom vocalization. So I think this bird's in the back, and you'll hear lots of booming, but it might not align up with this bird, but you're hearing other birds on the lek. In that foot stomping, I had a grad student study that. They stomp their feet 20 times a second. Okay, so next I'm going to show lesser prairie chicken. And again, the air sac inflates. This time the air sac is magenta colored. And also notice the length of time the air sac inflates. I find that that's a good cue when you're looking at them a mile away through your scope, is the length of time that air sac inflates. Lesser prairie chickens, they just go a pop, pop, and so the air sac inflates a very short time. There's a female. You can always tell the females because they're the only ones that aren't displaying, and they're in the middle of the lek, and they don't get beat up. Every once in a while, there's a male that'll come in, and he'll be in the middle of the lek, and he'll stand there like, I wonder if I can stay here, and then everybody beats him up. If it's a bird just walking through the lek, that's a female. Okay, and then I'll show some so I take most of the videos, but all these pretty pictures are different professional photographers that have come out through the year. I'll take pictures at the end because I talk a long time or I take questions at the end because I talk a long time about prairie chickens. But yeah, this is a greater prairie chicken in the front and a lesser prairie chicken in the back, and the kind of right after display. Next behavior I'm going to talk about is the flutter jump. And I love the flutter jump because it's always done by kind of the loser males. They're the males at the edge of the territory, and there's a female on the lek, and the female's not near them. And so they jump into the air and say, hey, look over here. Kind of, it's a flutter jump display. And so this is a male in the middle of the flutter jump display. Oops, I must have missed the video. Let's do the video. Okay, here we go. So here he is, he's in the back, he's all by himself. There's a female off picture. He's like, look over here. And there's usually a cackle vocalization that is also going on. There we go. So that's a flutter jump display. And then the last thing you're going to see, and you'll see a lot of this, is fighting or aggression or face-offs. And so they are chickens, and they do physically fight with each other. And so just kind of notice the physical fighting.
I'm fighting with the floor.
They have lots of reason to fight. There's at least 3 female. So again, that fighting is physical, and usually, so I hear a lek from a distance, and so I know it's there, and then I get permission to walk on the property, and then I usually try to walk it up in the afternoon, so when the birds aren't there, so I'm not disturbing them. But I can always tell where a lek is because there's feathers and poop everywhere. So those feathers are a real good sign. And yeah, these are physical altercations. Sometimes they just sit and stare at each other at the territory line for a long time. But I love this series of pictures by Judd Patterson that caught him in the act. So that one's trying to fly away and still holding on, still holding on. Lesser prairie chickens have a unique behavior that's not found in any other grouse. So this antiphonal display is a type of cooperative display. We see that a little bit in the mannequin, lek mating mannequin, but this is really unique to the grouse. And so this is a cooperative display, and I'm going to show the whole sequence. At first, it's just going to be 2 males looking at each other, and then they're going to make this little gobble noise, and like, are you ready? And the other one says, no, not ready. And the other one gobbles again and says, are you ready? And they say, okay, now. And then they make these back and forth vocalizations, and they're within fractions of a second. I mean, this is really interesting coordinated display. Okay, so they look at each other. You ready? No. Parrot.
Where's the female?
The female's off the screen somewhere. But they'll do this without the female present as well. So yeah, that antiphonal display is only found in lesser prairie chickens. They do make this, I really hate the name of this behavior, the prenuptial bow. But they do this when the female is in close proximity and they think they're going to mate soon. They just lay themselves on the ground. I think it's kind of interesting because, you know, the sister taxa to greater and lesser prairie chicken is sharp-tailed grouse, and sharp-tailed grouse have their wings out. And so this is the only time graders or lessers put their wings out is during this prenuptial bow. So a little bit of connection. Okay, and then all these things lead to the main event, a copulation. So copulations, obviously the male gets on the back of the female. It only takes a few seconds. There's often failed attempts right before. So you'll see a few times where the female will crouch, like she's ready, but the male's not, or the male tries and she's like, oh, just kidding, I'm not ready. So check out this whole sequence. The thing to notice is that at the end, the male gets beat up. And then that's one thing. And then the other thing is watch for the behavior of the female, because we know that this is a successful copulation because after the copulation, the female shakes her wings vigorously. So check it out. This one doesn't have sound, but there she is. Just kidding. Just getting ready. She crouches. She's like, okay, I'm ready. And he is like, oh, I got to fight with this guy first. Like you missed your chance. But see, there she's shaking, so it was successful. Okay. still shaking. There's several ideas, but I don't know, it's never been tested, but the idea is that she shakes to get any ectoparasites that may have been transferred to get them off, but I don't know, that's never been tested. Now that I'm done with the videos, I think I'm going to send this around so I don't forget. If my board likes to know how many people I talk to in a year, so if you put your name on here, I'd appreciate it. And if you want to put your email on there, you'll get one email from us a month. So, and we cover, just lots of different topics in our email newsletters. Okay, so release of copulation. So here's some stills. Here's the female in the solicitation posture. And then just the series of copulation, bites the back of the neck, twist around, and it's done. That's it. The other thing I recorded during my PhD and thereafter is territory size. And so we measured the size of the male's territory by working down the position relative to grid stakes. And then we could, put all the points together and find the center of the lek versus where the center of each male's territory is. So from this, we could measure territory size and distance to the center of the lek. And then obviously testosterone is usually important, and so we also measured testosterone by taking a blood sample immediately after we removed them from the trap. Okay, so, thinking about, okay, what traits are females using? This is a whole long list of traits, what they look like, their testosterone levels, their territory size, their behavior. So that's what we looked at. And the results, drum roll, 5 years of work, this is what I found out, that males were more successful if they had larger, longer tarsus. That's the size of their leg. It's a measure of physical or structural size. They had larger combs above their eyes. They had higher levels of testosterone. They were closer to the center of the lek. What's interesting is if you take testosterone out of this analysis, behavior becomes really important. So there must be some interaction between testosterone and behavior. And this is the only graph, oh no, I lied. There's 2 graphs in this talk. So this is the first graph, and if it's on the 0 line, that means that it wasn't important. If it's above it, that means there's a positive correlation, and if it's below, it's negative. So males with higher levels of testosterone, larger combs, and larger tarsus got more copulations, and males closer to the center, so a smaller distance, also got more copulations. And so, I did this for males for my PhD, and so when I got my tenure track job, I was like, oh, what should I do next? Well, let's look at the females. And so I thought, okay, so I racked my brain long and hard, and I'm like, okay, so what makes females sexy? And I racked my brain, what could the male be interested in with the female? And I could only come up with one thing. It's the same species. So, okay, this is pretty robust. To study this, I wanted to present taxidermy mounts of, females of the greater species, female lesser prairie chickens, and see if their behavior changed. But this is a lek mating system, so that traditional thing wouldn't really work, right? I would put one taxidermy mount out, then I would flush all the birds, and then I would put the other one out, and I could only test one male at a time, but all the other males are looking too. So how do I do this? So I thought, well, we'll put them on wheels, and so then we can zoom them out, and then zoom them back in. And so I'm not disturbing the lek by flushing them and putting another taxidermy mount in. I can present 2 models in one morning. And I thought this would work great. Then I also thought, well, this is a way I can do work and spend quality time with my husband. So, I like doing museum study skins, and he does radio-controlled airplanes, and I'm like, great, he can do all the electronics, and I'll just put the pretty thing on the outside. And so we did work together and got this done. Next series of slides just showing kind of how we made the robot. So a chassis, and there is the controller, and then there was a engine associated with each wheel. And then we just bought the taxidermy form out of a taxidermy catalog. I covered it in fiberglass and then hollowed out the center. And so that way I had a space for a battery. And if you're a little grossed out, maybe you want to look away for the next part. And then I took the skin over the eye, put glass eyes in, but also put a servo in the head. So now I could move the head left and right so it would look a little bit more realistic. And then put it all together, and I made 2 greaters and 2 lessers because I wanted to make sure that they're reacting to the species and not just a really good or poor taxidermy mount. So, and I thought the hard part was going to be constructing these robots. I found out that the hard part was driving it. So this is one of my first attempts. It's getting caught in the grass. You can see there's one male to the right going, what the heck is happening? And he's like, I have none of this. So I figured out after that, okay, I went to Home Depot or Lowe's or something, and I got 1-foot pieces of outside carpeting. And so I would put these racetracks with outdoor carpeting out there. But I found, again, when I got to the far end of the lek, that I would drive off the racetrack. It looks like it's open and you'd be able to see, right? No, I'd drive off and I'd get stuck in the... So I ended up just doing this one out and back. And so I could tell if it was in it. And I could get through about 3 or 4 males' territories in one morning that way. And so this is, we have a greater and a lesser. And you can see the head moving back and forth a little bit. And I also had to learn how to maneuver the robot. Like I couldn't just like zoom it out there like it was a car. I had to like go a little bit and be coy and just look around, you know, and like, so anyway, but eventually they did start reacting to it. And eventually they were reacting a little bit too well. He's trying to mate with it. So I wasn't completely successful in never flushing them. When this happened, they would keep trying to mate with it. So I would have to go out there, right it, and run back to my blind. But they returned within, 2-3 minutes as soon as I got back in my blind. So what did I find out? I found out that males did not change their display, whether it was their own species or the other species. But I found that males changed their aggression. But it wasn't in the way I predicted. I predicted they'd be, they'd do something different with their own species. I found that both graders and lessers were more aggressive when a grader female was present. So that suggests that yes, they can tell the species apart, but B, they're really cueing in on size. And a larger female would be a sexier female than a smaller one. And so that's what this says. Okay, so that's it about the science and research in prairie chicken biology, and now I'm kind of switching to prairie chicken conservation. Prairie chickens are declining. I don't know about Nebraska, but in Kansas, our politicians are really vocal about prairie chickens, and they say they're doing great. And they show this map where they plummeted in 2013. 2013 was our lowest numbers ever after a really severe prolonged drought with excessive heat. And then they dropped below 20,000. And they say, look at all this. This is great. We increased the population, and they're just doing swell. We don't have to list them as a threatened species. And they say that voluntary conservation is working. Well, let me talk about that. So our prairie chicken populations are not healthy. We have one, so this black line is the total population, and the yellow line is that shortgrass in western Kansas, and the other 3 lines are those 2 other populations in Kansas, Colorado, and the one in New Mexico. And you can see that there's only one population that's doing okay. It's not increasing, it's not decreasing, it's sort of steady with a lot of fluctuation. But the 3 other populations are very low numbers and are really in danger of disappearing. I'm doing it too high. Oh, come on. No, I'm doing it too much. Can you get me to this slide that I was at? So the next slide I'm going to show, it's going to show populations over a longer period of time. This one, thank you. Or no, this one is showing that most of these changes in population size is due to precipitation. And so this is, the top graph is the population size of prairie chickens, and that is in that short grass region. And then I took the rainfall in Gove County, which is the middle of that short grass region where we have the highest concentrations of prairie chickens, and you can see that those lines match up. But you don't need to take some, data poor graph for it. There have been numerous studies using really fancy, really great models that also show that precipitation is a driver of prairie chicken population size. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, went back one.
Back one.
Yes, thank you. Might be easier just do it that way. So again, and this is another one, and this is kind of my personal data. Between 2022 and 2023, there was another severe and excessive drought. And all of these leks that I've been studying declined by a third, about 30% over just 1 year period. So prairie chicken populations are really sensitive to this. The droughts lead to low food supply, but there's usually also excessive heat, which causes the young of the year to not survive. You can see that there is one lek that did increase, and this was a lek that was directly adjacent to a conservation reserve program. So it was an area of grass that was not grazed, that was not left, and so they were able to survive there. Okay, next slide, please. And this is showing the population size over a longer period of time. So you can see on the left, there was a decline in the 60s, and I was kind of wondering, one of the last talks I give, there's a person who's been through that time, and they said there was another severe drought in the 1950s. And so that's why they're extremely low, but you can see that they bounced back up about 150,000 and then went down. You can see a little boost in the 2000s when the Conservation Reserve Program became active. That's a federal program that pays farmers to take land out of row crop agriculture and put it back to grass. And so that, that program did a lot for that shortgrass prairie region. And you can see that there is a decline, and if I would continue this graph with 2023 and 2024, we would see moderate declines after that. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's causing these declines? Well, it is the lack of habitat to protect nests. I said that conservation, where it was ungrazed, we had an increase in population. Well, that thick cover protects the nest. But about 30% of nests survive to hatching. It takes 23 days to hatch, and so that's a long time where the nest is vulnerable. Next slide, please. About 25% of females are killed during the breeding period. So their main method of avoiding predation is to be camouflaged. And so if they can't be hidden in the grass. In fact, I had a field tech once, we didn't know the nest was there, and she was just walking through the grass, and she felt the prairie chicken fly up, and she looked down, and she had cracked one egg of a nest. It was an unbanded bird. So, I mean, they hold tight to try and protect the nest. Next slide, please. And only 45% of females survive to the following year. Next one. Male survival is about 55%. So when you see a prairie chicken lek and you see 20 birds out there, about 10 of them survive, from last year, and about 10 of them are recruits, new recruits, because each year about 50% die, and so it's you get a 50% turnover in our leks every year. So anyway, they are the chicken of the prairie, so they are food for about a lot of things. So females get eaten on the nest by mainly ground predators, skunks, badgers, coyotes, anything like that. The males generally get taken by aerial predators because they're out in the open, so red-tailed hawks, great horned owls, and the like. Next slide, please. One of the biggest threats to prairie chickens right now is energy development. And I'm not worried about the prairie chickens flying into the wind turbines. I'm worried about the fragmentation of the habitat, plus prairie chickens' natural tendency to avoid tall structures. So greater prairie chickens will stop using an area if there is as many as 3 trees per acre. Lesser prairie chickens start avoiding an area at 2 trees per acre. So they stay away from trees, and so these tall structures are very ominous. And if you think about it, what is trees? Trees are roosts for aerial predators. They're also corridors for those, raccoons and skunks and other things to come in. So they stay away from trees. So these things act like a tree. And plus wind turbines, each one of them has a road going up to them, and so that's further fragmenting the habitat. Lesser prairie chickens will not nest within a half a mile of a road or a mile of a house. Okay, so they don't like structures at all. Other types of threats, continued conversion of grass to other uses. I still see prairie get plowed under. I see those hedgerows between fields get removed. There's no habitat left. Grazing management that significantly reduces nesting cover. Like I said, if they have nowhere to hide, they can't. So in the Flint Hills, we're losing our prairie chickens because they're burning every year, and there's no residual cover for them to hide. We also get woody encroachment if it doesn't burn. So you have to have an intermediate burn cycle so that there's some vegetation. And like I said, woody encroachment is a big threat where burning has been suppressed. And I'm really worried about woody encroachment in the sandhills of Nebraska with greater prairie chickens. Next slide. And so again, this is the trajectory of lesser prairie chickens. They were listed as a candidate species in 1998. They weren't officially listed as threatened until 2014. That was vacated by a court ruling in 2015, and then it was listed as a threatened and endangered species in 2021. And there are 2 court cases right now that are challenging that listing. Next slide. But what gives me hope is that we know what the prairie chickens need. We know they have plenty of rangeland, so they have plenty of areas with short grass for displaying. They have plenty of rangeland with that intermediate grass that they need for raising young. But what they need is that nesting habitat, that thick cover, ungrazed areas for protecting the nest and the female as they're incubating. Next slide. And this is a picture. I knew this nest was there, and I was going in to see if it had hatched. And that's a nest right there in the middle. Can't you see it? Next slide, please. And I got this picture, it scared me, and I clicked the shutter right as it flew and got the female's tail as she was flying away. Next slide. So that, again, gives me hope. Also gives me hope is that they lay a ton of eggs, 14 eggs, and so they have a good ability to restock a population if we just give them that nesting cover. Next slide. And then we'll get the cute little chicks. Next slide. And by protecting prairie chickens, and I could put lesser or greater prairie chicken there, but by protecting prairie chickens, we're protecting a whole range of grassland species. So like I said, they need that short grass for displaying, and so that protects birds like hornlarks that like that short grass. They have mixed grass, but they also need that thick cover for nesting, so that protects things like dick thistles and things that need that thicker grass. And so by protecting prairie chickens, we're protecting the whole prairie ecosystem. Next slide. And so that gets to what Audubon of Kansas does. We try to protect prairie chickens and other species with 3 different means. So we have a 3-fold mission. The first part is advocacy. So we advance environmentally friendly legislation. We're the voice for wildlife when decisions are being made. We work mostly at the county and the state level. We do work in Nebraska. I've written things in defense of the sandhills when they've talked about putting transmission lines through the middle of the sandhills. So we write letters, we conserve declining species, we ensure proper wind energy siting, so we understand that we need wind and solar, but we just don't want it fragmenting our remaining prairie habitats. And then we work to conserve declining species, including lesser prairie chicken, whooping crane, black-footed ferret, and a few other species. Next slide. Second part is conservation. And why I have Nebraska plates on my vehicle is that we show how people and wildlife can coexist through our sanctuary program. So I was just up at our Hutton Niobrara Ranch Wildlife Sanctuary. That's a 5,000-acre ranch along the banks of the Niobrara River in northern Nebraska. Beautiful property. It hosts mountain lion and elk, greater prairie chicken, sharp-tailed grouse, porcupine, bobcat. It's just a wonderful property. But it is a working cattle ranch that supports those species. We also have 240 acres, Actiberg Wildlife Friendly Demonstration Farm near Lincoln, Kansas. And that is a working row crop agricultural farm, but it also has a beautiful riparian stream, and we added grassland buffer strips between the cropland and the stream, and now it supports Connie Acterberg's favorite bird, the bobwhite quail. And then lastly, we own a portion of Mount Mitchell Heritage Prairie. With the Mount Mitchell Prairie Guards, another nonprofit, we maintain that as a public park where people can access it all the time, walk their dogs, but it also has some of the best tall grass prairie you're ever gonna see. Has wonderful diversity of wildflowers and butterflies, and supports Henslow sparrows as well. Next slide. And then we have an education program. And so because we truly believe that people will not conserve what they don't understand. And so we try to get the word out. I mentioned, if you didn't get one of these on the way in, they were on the ends of the chairs. There are, I think, more on this side. This is our magazine, so take one of these. The one with the landscape is our latest and greatest. If you like what you see in here, I also have back issues outside on one of the round tables, so you can look and get some of the back issues. We also have nature adventure packs, which are pictured here. This is a backpack with adult and children's binoculars, fold-out field guides to birds, butterflies, and the moon. And we're trying to get these backpacks into every library in Kansas so that patrons have access to increasing their birdwatching opportunities. We have 2 festivals. We have the Celebration of Cranes. This is coming up. It's the first weekend in November. And we offer guided tours to Covera National Wildlife Refuge. And that is timed with the migration of the whooping cranes. And so since I've started, knock on wood, all of our tours have seen whooping cranes. But even if the whooping cranes are not there, there's thousands of sandhill cranes that put on quite a show. Maybe not as cool as Nebraska, but they do put on a good show. And next slide, please. We also have the Kansas Lectrex Prairie Chicken Festival. This is in Hays, Kansas, and we offer guided tours to see both greater and lesser prairie chickens. About 130 people show up, and most of them are from outside of Kansas. So they're coming from all over the country to the middle of nowhere, Kansas, to see our prairie chickens. And so those are the dates for next year, and registration opens up in December. If you're interested, I encourage you to get on our website now, kansaslectrex.org, and sign up for our newsletters, because we get about 70 registrations the first day. So if you want to get the spots you want, you got to sign up right away. Next slide. And we are fighting the good fight for these prairie chickens. There's so much, the politicians are saying that this is economic development versus, a dumb bird. And you can see all these listings to try and delist the prairie chicken. Next slide, please. Luckily we have someone at the top that vetoes these things. which we were really happy about. That was a battle that was won, but next slide. There's still a lot of things. So if they can't delist the species, they're trying to defund the enforcement of it. And so this is in the appropriations bill that is still trying to be passed. And so we're still at a war, prairie chickens, and like I said, there's 2 lawsuits still out there. We're still fighting a good fight, but be aware and vigilant of this and really make sure that the Endangered Species Act stays whole, no matter what species. This is also being tried on like long-eared bats and a host of other species. We need to be very vigilant to make sure the Endangered Species Act stays intact. Next slide. And what can you do, particularly being in Nebraska? This is the eBird map for lesser prairie chicken, and you can see that there's a magic line called I-70, and I'm like, this is not a biologically significant line. I've seen lesser prairie chickens north of that. And I think the, next slide. Yeah, so these are 2 predictions with climate change. So the top one is if it's only going to increase 1.5 degrees. The bottom one is if climate change is only going to increase the temperature by 3 degrees. But you can see in either scenario, these birds are ending up in Nebraska. So what I need you guys to do is make sure you're protecting your habitat, especially in southwest Nebraska. Protect your prairies. And if you want to help volunteer and do surveys, I'll give you some routes to try and look for lesser prairie chickens. It wouldn't surprise me if there was one in Nebraska now, but the more data we have to like say, no, this line is north of I-70 now, and we need to protect it in the future. It's very important. So next slide, please. And you know, the historical range, people like to draw this little circle. That little circle on the historical range of lesser prairie chicken is based on landowner surveys in the 1930s.
Oh.
This is a more recent study that did a habitat analysis that says, looking at habitat requirements of lesser prairie chickens, where would they be? Look at where we think, where this analysis says they are historically. I think it makes sense that there was a cutoff along the Platte River. So, and there is, anyway, Nebraska had lesser prairie chickens. We need to protect our prairies. Okay, next slide. So, how you can help. You can come to our Lectrex Festival. Next slide. You can sign up for our newsletter. So those of you joining us on YouTube, you can sign up for our newsletter and just stay aware and informed of everything that's happening. And then next slide. Of course, to support our mission, please support us. So thanks a lot for inviting me here. I really appreciate your interest in prairie chickens.
Let's get your microphone. Just a minute, Bertha. We'll get the
I can
microphone.
yell.
Well, people are
Do they live year round? And what's their breeding season? How long is that?
Yeah, so they're not migratory, so they're in the same area year round. And their breeding season is generally from mid-March to mid-May. But if there's a warm day in January, they might go out and boom a couple times. And so you might hear them booming, I wouldn't say year round, but they also have a little bit of a peak in activity in the fall. So the males hang on the leks, and the new, the boys that were born that year will start, figuring it out. But yeah, but mostly the peak of the breeding is mid-March through mid-May.
There are questions? Here we go.
Well, I found out that south of here, next to the Kansas border, then up, I'd say 45 minutes south of here, then down, there's always been a remnant population of prairie chickens. I've got some on my property down there.
Awesome.
Fun to
Thank you
watch 'em.
for being a good steward.
But I've noticed one thing, they're declining,
They are.
and the number of acres of CRP, or Conservation Reserve Program, has also been declining, and I
Yeah.
think that's a big correlation.
Yep,
Right.
yeah, so we all need to plug for the Farm Bill. So when CRP was very very popular. The cost of corn per acre and the cost of CRP
Right.
were very similar, and now the cost of CRP hasn't changed, but the cost of corn or payment from corn has gone up, and so we need to get more money towards farmers and for CRP, and but other organizations, other nonprofits are also trying to figure out if they can fill the gap
Yeah.
to make that happen.
And where I see the prairie chickens is pretty close to the native prairies.
Yes.
Have been planted, you know, and are still there, but once they plow it up, you don't see the prairie chickens.
Exactly.
But there's one idea I have that I think might help,
Mm-hmm.
and that's if Nebraska could get a prairie chicken license plate. I think that makes people aware.
Yeah.
So
I think
everybody
the
here,
likelihood of
try to contact whoever to get a license plate.
Well, Kansas, we have wildlife, we were supposed to have wildlife license plates by now, but you can't buy them yet. So you at least have something for wildlife. We should have something soon. But yeah, it's not a prairie chicken.
Yeah,
That
we've
would,
got the sandhill crane, but they're only here part of the time. Prairie chickens are here all year,
true.
and they also fed the homesteaders.
Yes, there's so much history. That's like a whole nother topic of prairie chicken history. They fed homesteaders and they also inspired Native American dancing.
Chicken dance.
Yeah.
Just two things, one comment and a question. In Sherman County, which is 45 miles northwest of Grand Island, up in there, there is some prairie chicken up in that area, but they come and go, you know, a lot, but there is families up into that area. The other big question is, who's the father or mother of the research for prairie chicken, and then how far does it go back? Because, you know, that's all important too as you put your data together. So how far does that go where it first began, and how valuable all of that's been? So.
Yeah, the Hammerstroms were the couple at University of Wisconsin, Madison. They did lots of prairie chicken research, and so yeah, we have a lot of their historical data. We have current data. Like I said, we have so much data on what prairie chickens need, and it's clear that they need grass. Like even when there's 95% grass within that bird's territory, they're using grass more often than random throughout the range. So it's in their name, prairie chicken. We know what they need. We just have to figure out how to make it feasible and economic.
Quick question too, where I know this is at Sherman County, there isn't really good water source. Do they not need much water? I mean, this is pretty dry area, you know.
Yeah, most birds get a lot of the water they need through their metabolic digestive system. They have a very efficient urinary system. But prairie chickens, if you give them a cattle trough, they'll drink out of it. So I think cattle troughs are a nice substitute. Plus there's a lot of dew in the mornings, and so they're getting water that way. So that's different ways they'll get water.
So I've got two questions. First one, there was a large prairie chicken lick up near Mullen, Nebraska, and the owner of the property actually drove people out there, and he had a bus set up as a blind, and for many years that was a kind of a tourist attraction, I guess. And then he told me that suddenly they all disappeared. The prairie chickens disappeared without any known cause or any change in the land. So I wonder what might have caused that. And then my second question involves your comments about burning. It sounds like that's played both ways. On one hand, if you burn, you said, you can destroy needed habitat. On the other hand, if you don't burn, there can be encroachment by woody plants. So how can we manage that well in these prairies in Nebraska?
Okay, so for your first question, how can prairie chickens disappear quickly? They can, especially after a drought. And so both lessers and greater prairie chickens are vulnerable to extreme droughts. Plus, there seems to be this tipping point. You know, if there's all of a sudden too much woody vegetation, or I've seen leks disappear because of energy infrastructure. This is just anecdotal evidence, but when they changed the speed limit on I-70 from 65 to 70 or 75 that increased noise. I was studying a few leks right next to it, and yeah, I could hear the roadway noise, and I think it makes a difference. So, I mean, these prairie chickens are so sensitive, and so it can be probably not just one factor, but probably multiple factors all at once. And then your first question was about they disappearing. The second question was about burning. Yes, so too much or too little are both bad. So we don't want burning. In the Flint Hills, they're burning every single year, thousands and thousands of acres. I think it's like 70% of the Flint Hills gets burned every year. That's a bit much.
We get the smoke.
You get the smoke, yes. You get the smoke from the Flint Hills. So that's a bit much. But not burning enough is just as bad. So and so with our sanctuary in the Sandhills, I know a lot of ranchers are scared of burning, and so they're using other forms of cedar removal, using mechanical removal, and that's good. I like burning if I can, because that not only removes the cedars, but also gets rid of all the dead thatch, puts nutrients into the soil, helps reinvigorate everything, creates openings in the grass, make it easier for bobwhite to walk through. So it does so many more things. So if you're a farmer or rancher, I encourage you to burn. Figure out a way to burn, just don't do it every year. In eastern Nebraska, I'm not sure about rainfall, but eastern Nebraska, if you're like Kansas, I'd say every 2 to 3 years. Western Nebraska, at our sanctuary in the Sandhills, we're trying to get onto a 6-year cycle. 7 years is the average when a cedar tree starts producing seeds. So not 7 years, something before that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the questions are quite professional, but I've been called silly. So here's a really silly question.
Okay.
They're chickens.
They
Why
are.
can't we raise them in a pen and then let them go and build up the population?
So we've been doing that with Atwater's prairie chickens in Texas. So greater prairie chicken, there's 3 subspecies. The one that's in Nebraska. There was one called the heath hen that was found on the East Coast, and there was a third that one's now extinct. The third subspecies is the Atwater's prairie chicken, found on the Texas coast with the salt marshes. That population along the Texas coast, we've been raising in captivity and releasing them. They used to raise them like chickens, and then they would put them out there, and they would act like domestic chickens and get eaten by predators almost immediately. They're doing some other things where they're doing some more natural raising, and they have better survival, but it's not the best. So we cannot approximate, wild habitat conditions and learning and on the ground as well as wild ones. So the best thing is to do wild ones, and there is a facility in Oklahoma that is doing, I'm not sure if they have lessers. Yeah, they have Atwaters. I know they have facilities that they're trying to keep some prairie chickens at, and their goal is to have both Atwaters and lesser prairie chickens there. But we shouldn't have to raise them in captivity to have wild birds. It is best to have because if we have them in captivity, we need the grass on the ground if we're ever going to release them. Atwater's prairie chicken during Hurricane Harvey wiped out 90% of the wild population, had to be repopulated from that captive population. Captive populations have their point, but it's so much easier to protect what we have. And in Nebraska, you have the largest remaining unfragmented prairies. I'm sorry I get emotional because I just love these birds. And I'm really worried about them. I always said that I wanted to lead prairie chicken tours when I retired, and I don't think it's guaranteed that lessers will still be there in 20, 25 years. So I think that we have to, without the prairie, we're not going to have the prairie chicken. And if we lose the prairie chicken, we're going to lose that connection and that integrity of our prairies. So you wanted something silly and emotional, and that's it. We just gotta have that.
How do they taste?
How they taste? A rancher said once, I got a recipe for you. I said, okay, give me the recipe. You take a prairie chicken, you wrap it to a board, you smoke it for 3 hours, then you throw the prairie chicken away and eat the board. So I guess they're a little gamey. I love them too much to try them. I've tried pheasant and quail and I like them, but.
In the copulation, I guess it was, as soon as it ended, there was a male free-for-all, big
Yeah.
fight.
Yeah.
They've already been fighting with each other, establishing their territories. Why suddenly this big free-for-all after copulation where she's chosen the best male in her eyes? What's going on?
Well, maybe there's room for her to change her mind. And in fact, my advisor watched a female solicit a male multiple times but never complete the act. And another male kept coming in and beating him up, and she eventually chose that other male. So there is, if you can disrupt that copulation, there's an opportunity for that female to change her mind.
Okay, and if they succeeded and then she copulated with another male afterwards, can that male sperm then overtake the first male, or no?
So we don't have detailed studies of this, but in they've studied this in domestic chickens, and there's a last male precedence, and so the last male to copulate has a precedent for fertilizing the eggs.
Okay, well, that answers the question.
I don't know anything about this stuff, but I just wondered about, they clean out all the ditches and everything, but they're trying to put some of those crops back, or some of the plants between the crops and stuff now, but that's not prairie, so I don't know if is that anything that they might be interested in or not?
So prairie chickens in particular need 50,000 acres of connected grassland for a healthy system of leks. And so a few acres along the ditches aren't going to be enough for them. They're going to help a whole suite of other grassland birds. They're going to help pheasants and quail and other things, but prairie chickens really need large, intact areas.
Is that why they're doing is it vermigrass or what they're doing in the ditches so much now?
I would love to learn more about what you're doing in your ditches in Nebraska, because Kansas, they're just mowing them all the time and taking them away, and I don't know what's happening in the ditches in Nebraska.
We'll do one more question, and then if you want to stick around, we've got refreshments out here. Be sure and sign in at the registration if you didn't out at the front table, and also Jackie had her registration that's coming around. But yeah, stay afterwards, and I'm sure Jackie will answer some more questions.
I can talk about prairie chickens all night.
But here's the last one for the record. Here we go, Jeff.
Hi, I had a question about the climate change maps that you showed for the lesser prairie chicken. How far typically will these things migrate in a year's time, say?
Well, they don't migrate, but they can move quite a distance. I think dispersal distances like 20 miles or 50 miles, and the females move farther than the males, and so at the edges of the range you get hybridization. There are greater, lesser hybrids. They're usually 1% to 3% of the population, but they have potential to move if the habitat's there.
I was just wondering when we can expect them in Nebraska. So
I don't know.
How far do they have to go in 20 miles per year?
Well, I think there's not a lot of birders in that area, and I'm not sure that I would like to get more data in that area. Yeah, so I encourage you all between mid-March, mid-May, half hour before sunrise, 2 hours after sunrise, go listen. You can hear them a mile away.
Well, thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you didn't pick up one of Jackie's newsletters at the end of her magazine, at the end of the road, we'll have some brownies and cookies out here for you. Don't forget to sign in.
And if you missed her sign, appreciate it.